Good evening, and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay family, we are rising out of the ashes together. Our topic on this evening is sex trafficking, and we have with us Jennifer Peterkin, our co-host, and our guest for the evening is Sue Ingram. Listeners, if you have questions or comments for our guest or co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. If you have resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. Jen, would you greet our listeners for this evening?
Yes, hello, Luv Bay. So happy to be back again with Tia and with my good friend Sue. Really excited for the topic tonight and just to hear about Sue's organization and what she's doing. If you're a first-time listener, my name is Jen Peterkin. I'm a domestic violence advocate. I became an advocate after going through my own abusive marriage. Right now, I am currently working on a project called The Human Experience. It's about storytelling and how, our experiences, our lived experience makes us who we are. It determines our principles, our values, and our empathy towards other people and towards the world. So if you want to follow along with that, please go follow me on Instagram at GetTheHX. Or visit my website, getthehx.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. Sue, please introduce yourself to Luv Bay.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me as a guest on Luv Bay. I'm thrilled to be able to speak to your audience. Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Jen. My name is Sue Ingram, and I am the founder and the executive director of an organization called Walk Her Home. And what we started back in 2016 was an opportunity for high school and college students to teach other students about the dangers of both sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And that is to teach them what signs to look for, what are some of the risk factors, what to avoid on social media, how prevalent it can be, and again, ways in which you can help to protect yourself as well as other students. The way that Walk Her Home works is we try to raise funding from different events that the kids do in their Walk Her Home clubs to support two organizations that I'm on the board of. The first one is called the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. I just got back from a retreat with this organization a few weeks ago. And what they're doing is trying to pass legislation and advocacy and lawsuits to be able to put these, especially tech platforms, on alert that they're coming after them in order to dismantle any type of service they offer that is endangering kids. They have a massive lawsuit right now against Twitter because a 9-year-old boy accidentally had passed on his images to somebody he thought was a girl, and it turned out to be somebody who was uploading those images to the world's largest platform for pornography, Pornhub. And they didn't, once he told his parents, they still didn't take it down for 2 weeks. So those are the kinds of lawsuits that they do. And then on the other side of it, I'm on the board of the National Trafficking Shelter Alliance, which is a network of 100 safe houses across the country. And we're just trying to establish best practices and accreditation so we have some really high standards of care. That was a very long introduction, so I'm done now.
Well, please tell us how can we access information for Walk Her Home? You have a website, social media?
Yeah, walkherhome.org or walkherhomeclub.com.
Awesome.
As well as on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I do not have those names of those platforms, but you can just look up Walk Her Home.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. So listeners, as usual, we want to start with sharing some resources we have for you in Kenya, Africa, the Coalition on Violence Against Women. Their website is covaw.or.ke. In Malawi, Africa, we have Center for Alternatives for Victimized Women and Children. Their website is cavoc.org. Their phone number is 265-052 39876. And for more information, you can email cavwoc@gmail.com. And then we have Mauritius, Africa, SOS Women. Their website is sosfemmes.intnet.mu. And again, listeners, on tonight, our topic is sex trafficking. And with that, Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here, Sue. I feel like this is, I mean, we've obviously talked about this before in your organization privately, but I feel like we could have you here for a series of like 10 yes. weeks, just because there's so much information about human trafficking and sexual exploitation. So just as kind of a brief, I know that's hard, but a brief overview, what is human trafficking and sexual exploitation, and how did you specifically get involved, or why this issue specifically for you, and how did Walk Her Home start?
That was 3 questions, actually.
Yes, it was. But I'm just loading you up so I don't have to talk as much.
I see that. Okay, let me start with the actual definition by our State Department of what is classified or considered to be human trafficking. Anytime that well, first of all, under the age of 18 automatically becomes human trafficking because you're a minor.
Yeah.
Trafficking is a bit of a misnomer because we're not physically necessarily putting somebody in a car and driving them across a state or a country border. Okay, so it is considered trafficking if there is force, fraud, or coercion. Okay, so if you think about what the definition of any one of those 3 words would be, the number one thing that comes into my mind is manipulation, right? Manipulation is posing as a love interest. Manipulation is promising gifts. Manipulation could be someone who is looking to get access to drugs, and you offer them the drugs. You offer them housing. You offer them jewelry. You offer them food. In exchange, you are then being sold as a commodity that is pretty much managed by a pimp or a trafficker in order to produce revenue. So those would be some of the definitions. Now, often people kind of misinterpret what trafficking is based on a fictional character in the movie Taken, where she happens to get off a plane, she's walking down the street, she's thrown in the back of a car. That's not to say it doesn't happen like that, but it's rare. And in fact, one of the most shocking statistics related to sex trafficking in the United States is 40% of victims are related to the families. Mm-hmm. So that means that it is a mother or a father or an aunt or an uncle or a cousin that is coercing, usually a child, to get involved in a sexual act for a fee. And we're finding that that is a bigger and bigger problem, especially here within the United States, of familial trafficking. And it's much more difficult to identify that because they're inside the home. We had an interesting case here, not far from where I live, but an hour away, in Lancaster, where a woman, because she understood what to look for, pulled into the Wawa, which for the listeners around the world probably wouldn't have any idea what I'm saying. It's a convenience store, and it sounds very funny. I remember when I moved to Philadelphia, and Wawa. So anyway, she pulled into the convenience store, which she does on a regular basis to get gas or, thing of milk. And she noticed that there was a child getting out of a car and going into another car. The next day, she goes back to the same place, and she sees that same child getting out of the car that the child got into, getting back into the first car. And again, she knew what she was looking for, so she reported it. And it was a huge bust of a trafficking ring in a relatively small, safe town. So that's kind of like the long answer to the question. The second question related to when did I get started in this and why? My church was doing a partnership with the International Justice Mission, which only works outside the United States. And they asked us to do a community assessment in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area on what human trafficking looked like. My team thought it probably wouldn't take long. We spent 2 years interviewing law enforcement, district attorneys, victims advocates, and we were shocked, horrified. Like the things that I heard felt so traumatizing because I came out of it with an innocence, with absolutely no real understanding that it is down the street. I mean, we have busts at Hampton Inns and hotels in some of the richest areas of where I live, in the King of Prussia area. So it is happening literally everywhere. And that's not an overstatement or an exaggeration. Where there is money and where there is access, you are going to have human trafficking. So that was put on my heart back then. I worked with a documentary producer in Pennsylvania to do a film called From Liberty to Captivity, basically saying that this is a state that had the Underground Railroad and we tried to get people out of slavery, and we were successful to some extent. We have more slaves in this world than at any other time in history. They're talking about numbers like 40 million people held in captivity through human trafficking. And human trafficking comes in two parts: sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I don't deal as much with the labor trafficking, but I know with certain types of agricultural communities, they have illegal immigrants coming in, being forced into these places of labor, not paying them their wages and not allowing them any opportunity to really have freedom. Was that all? I think there was one more question.
How did Walk Her Home, like what was Walk Her Home born out of?
So I was helping this documentary filmmaker, and I was on my way to an event, and I'm driving on the back roads, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to raise funds for their film, which is significant to make a documentary. And I was really racking my brain thinking, how are we going to raise $750,000? It was a big number to make a film. And I'm thinking, and it's a beautiful night. It's like a September, it's warm, the windows are down. And all of a sudden I see a little sign on the side of the road that says charity walk. And I'm thinking, maybe we could do some charity walks, raise awareness, invite some people in. And I said, well, what are we going to call this? And then I start to think to myself, we'll call it Walk Her Home. It was one of those like bolts, that comes down from the heavens and you go, oh, that's it. So I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I think it's too much work. I'm running my own business. I don't really think this is for me. Thanks, God. I appreciate your confidence in believing that I can do it, but I'm going to take a pass. Just going to take a pass on that. So long story short, that was September. And I basically said, God, if it's still in my heart by the end of December, I'm all in. And that's indeed what happened. And we started doing charity events. We had Homeland Security. We had the FBI. We had the district attorney's office. We had the filmmaker. We had people speak on the subject. We had 300 people in a field trying to, get a sense of the fact that, yes, this does happen and you should care about it. And Jen, I don't know about you and maybe Tia as well, getting involved in the domestic, violence aspect of it. There are many people that will turn away and flat out say to me, you know what? I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And when you say you don't want to hear about it, you are complicit in exactly the damage that is being done to women, and some degree of men, and especially the children.
Yeah, thank you. I just think about, kind of to your point too, we talk about interpersonal violence and, these familial relationships or these close relationships where violence exists within them and there's a bubble, and, people on the outside either aren't aware or just don't want to be fully tapped into what that looks like, because it's a really difficult place to be. One of my favorite quotes, I'm sure I've said this on the show before, so I apologize. People are like, here she goes again. But one of my favorite quotes is from the abolitionist William Wilberforce, who said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you may never again say that you did not know." And I love that because it's just so viscerally explains, I think, the human condition there, because once you know something, you have a responsibility to it and to the people involved with it. So what is, we deal with a lot of domestic violence, which includes obviously a lot of interpersonal relationships. And I don't think people are very aware of how closely related something like domestic violence and sex trafficking or sexual exploitation are. Can you speak a little bit about that?
It's interesting when you mentioned about the domestic violence. The difference is, in a marriage, it's considered almost legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not as much attention brought to the fact that it is very similar in context to the aggression and the violence that a victim of trafficking is facing by a pimp and a trafficker. But we think of that as, really bad men. But we don't tend to think of that if a, husband is in some type of encounter with his wife. Oh, well, they're just having a fight. Maybe it got a little bit, out of hand, but that's maybe to be expected occasionally in marriages, right? But it is the exact same thing, just in a different context when you're talking about human trafficking. And it's giving the awareness and the empowerment to women to say you have choices and you have options. One of the biggest problems that we have with trying to, and in every field, there's different dialogue or terminology. I learned this great word in college I don't get to use very much, nomenclature. Like, I'm going to say it now.
That is a great word.
Isn't it? I feel so smart when I say it. But the point is, there's certain lingo that we kind of say is now antiquated. So one of the things that we don't use anymore in the field of human trafficking is rescue. And I've spoken to so many trafficking survivors who want us to understand it's their story. Nobody rescued them. If anybody could teach us about resilience, it would be a trafficking survivor. I've spent so many time, I just am in awe of them. I sit and I listen, and there's an incredible residential program in Nashville, Tennessee called Thistle Farms. It's one of the first ones in this country to start out to try to understand the type of trauma that a trafficking victim goes through. And it's called Thistle Farms. And every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, we sit, and I've been there a couple times during the Wednesday morning kind of service. They put a candle in the middle of the room. And all of the women in the program and all of the people that support it, including the community, sit in a big circle. And we cry, we share our stories, we talk about the love and the support and what that means. And when you listen to them be able to rise above the type of violence, the type of trauma, like one woman described, if a door slams ever so slightly, she will have a real reaction because it's a trigger for her. And there's so many of those triggers that they have to work through from their experiences. So I wish more people would have the opportunity to meet these women and see how much they grow. The woman that runs the program has a horrific story that's been written about quite a bit. And she was trafficked the whole way from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I won't even get into all the different types of violence that she suffered. She went back to school. She got her bachelor's degree. She got her master's degree. She's now the director of residential programs at Thistle Farms. And we see these success stories quite a bit. But as I started this conversation to say, the biggest problem initially is getting a woman to self-identify as a trafficking victim. She can't connect the abuse that she's going through because she is so convinced that he is there to care for her, to love her, to support her, to buy her clothes, to occasionally maybe take her out to dinner. And if you've grown up in a home where you had already experienced sexual abuse, we don't have concrete evidence yet. We don't have the data necessarily to confirm this, but everything that we are getting in terms of feedback is 99% of every single adult prostituted woman was sexually assaulted and abused as a child. I get particularly offended when I hear late night talk show hosts use slang terms for prostituted women. What they're doing is basically annihilating and dismissing the trauma that a little girl faced when she was sexually abused. So if you have never had validation, if you've never had love, and if you've never had care and support, and somebody walks into your life and they offer you that, you're going to take it. And you're not going to understand that the situation that you're in is one of control and domination and pain and suffering for you. So it takes a long time. The beautiful thing is my work with the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, NTSA, one of our board members is in Seattle. So she connected with Microsoft. We are about to come out with an app that has scrubbed the internet for all of the cell phone numbers of all of the women that are being put out there for sex for sale. And this app will be able to reach out to them via text and say, there's a safe house a mile from you. Would you like to learn more? Can someone reach out to you? Mm-hmm. We're hoping, we've been working on this, I haven't been doing anything except hearing about what they're doing out at Microsoft. Hopefully we'll go live this fall.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's
yes,
huge.
it is. Mm-hmm.
Tia, do you have any questions?
So you kind of touched on it a little before, but can you talk about the different aspects that allow or aid sex trafficking going on unnoticed right in public spaces? For instance, spas set up to create the image of giving massages, but they're not. Sporting events, how something as huge as the Super Bowl can actually be used by sex traffickers to connect and to actually, take victims. I believe it may have been this past winter that a woman went to a sporting event. I don't remember if it was football or basketball, but she went to the ladies' room and never came back because she was literally kidnapped before, she had gotten back to her seat. Just going to the bathroom at a sporting event. And then you mentioned hotels before, how hotel chains unknowingly are being used to aid and abet sex traffickers.
Yeah. Let me answer the last part of what you just said. Hotel chains or even just independent franchised hotels, it's not unknowing. They are fully aware, and making a lot of business from a lot of those rooms being used by pimps and by traffickers. It's fairly common. There are a few attorneys that I'm working with or I know of that are filing lawsuits against hotels because they are, again, complicit if they have any knowledge. If you see a steady stream of young girls coming into a hotel and they're only there for an hour or two, you have a responsibility to report that to law enforcement. If you're a hotel manager or you work and you're a hotel employee, and if you don't, you could be definitely charged in a lawsuit or named in a lawsuit as being aware of what was happening and not doing anything to stop it. In terms of the events, there's a little bit of a kind of a myth that went around the internet a few years ago saying that the Super Bowl attracted or had more human trafficking than any other event. And while it's true that it's the Super Bowl, it is college basketball. It is pro golf. It's any event where you have an elevated, demographic of men attending that event. I mean, the traffickers know that. The things that you should be looking for is if you see somebody typically older, like we see this a lot, it's been reported, like flight attendants have been trained now what to look for in airplanes. If you see an older man with a younger girl, if he speaks for her, if he won't let her out of his sight, if he has to walk her to the bathroom, if she keeps her head down, if she looks uncomfortable. I mean, those are all the signs. The regional director of Homeland Security here in the Philadelphia area told me once that if you think that that person is in immediate danger, call 911. If you suspect that something seems slightly off or you're not really sure, then you call the human trafficking hotline. And at least do something. I think a lot of times people either say, I don't want to get involved, or they say, I don't really know, I'm not sure. The good news is you don't work in law enforcement. You don't have to. That's not your job.
Right.
He said to me, from Homeland Security, he said, we are only a limited number of people that are able to look for and detect and define human trafficking. You all are the boots on the ground. You are in the airports and the bus stations and the malls and the restaurants and the schoolyards. You can see things that look unusual. And all I'm asking people to do is just make a phone call. You don't have to know. You don't have to investigate. You don't have to do anything more than that. Just be willing to make a phone call. You could be saving a girl or a woman's life.
Yes. So, Luv Bay, we want to take a moment to welcome you again to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, with a replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., and also Thursday and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Luv Bay, we definitely want you to remember that we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. We have a few more resources that we would like to share with you. From Mayet Africa, we have Association for the Status of Women and Victim Assistance. Their hotline number is 0269612949. In Nigeria, Africa, we have Project Alert on Violence Against Women. Their website is projectalertnig.org. In Rwanda, Africa, we have Rwanda Women's Network. Their website is rwandawomenNetwork.org. And we also want to share with you Polaris Project, the National Human Trafficking Hotline in the United States. Their phone number is 1-888-373-7888, or you can text the words Be Free, BEFREE. You can text those two words to the number 233733. And their website is polarisproject.org. And Polaris is POLARIS. Sue, I just want to thank you so much for being here and for all the information that you've already shared. And I do have one question before we go back to Jen. You work with young people, college students. So I want to ask you, what is the response of the young people that you work with? How are they able to process the information? Because this is not a small topic. So how are they able to process and, just what are their responses in helping and moving forward to bring awareness?
I will say that it takes a very special high school student or college student that is really driven and motivated to care about this topic.
Yes.
And want to engage in it. And when we do, they are really extraordinary. The first person who started the Walk Her Home Club was 16. She was a high school junior. She is now graduating from college, and I just had her for dinner the other night and spent a lot of time with her. It is such a privilege and an honor for me to be able to go on this journey with them and bring up, the next generation. I do believe that these young people have such a calling on their heart for social justice. The thing is to make sure that they're channeling it in the right way, that they're not starting projects and then just kind of letting it in the infancy stages without really developing it. One of the challenges that I've had in my public speaking, mostly in college, is some pushback from some women who believe that sex workers are not given enough time at the forum to be able to get their public message out. Mm-hmm. We're pushing up against now some pro-prostitution type of legislation in some states. I think Rhode Island just recently legalized prostitution. I don't think that I could ever find enough words to express how damaging that will be to all the victims of human trafficking. It will literally end investigations. Our law enforcement will not be so focused to try to identify and bring to safety those victims if we start passing that type of legislation. And the problem is, as we've seen with other movements, it's a small percentage of people that can have a very loud voice. Mm-hmm. If the culture has defined them as being allowed to push out the victimization that will occur if their advocacy is successful. So, those are some of the things. I've had some hostility from some college students in person a few years ago when I would do presentations. And I don't want to be combative, and I don't want to debate with you. What I ask her to do is for her to do her own research and determine if she believes that prostitution is a good, safe, meaningful, rewarding vocation for anybody. And one of the people that expressed it the best, the president of the Public Defender's Office in Philadelphia, said, "I know of no other profession where you have to be afraid of your customer beating you or harming you, and you need police protection from those customers. I know of no other profession where you either have to get intoxicated or drugged yourself in order to do your job. So if we love women and we care for women, we want to support women, all women should be trying to stop legislation to legalize a very, very harmful profession for women.
Yes. Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, I think, the public narrative has become that it's an empowering choice. And what I think most people don't realize is that for most, if not all, for most, it is not a choice. There is no choice made. And I also wanted to ask you about this too, so that kind of segues nicely. But just like in with pornography, you cannot know whether or not what you're consuming is from somebody that has done it willingly or been coerced or forced to do it. And so I think that is so much like there's nothing else that I can think of where you're not sure, right? Where you don't know, am I consuming something that was made willingly, that somebody wasn't forced or coerced into doing? And so I think it's such a hot topic, and the empowerment movement, which I am very much for, there's this conversation shift that I think has been really insidious, because it's supposed to be an empowerment for women, but what it's done is just given men and consumers an easy out for the consumption of pornography or prostitution. So can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to really know that what you're getting into in that realm?
What, define your question?
If you are a consumer, I think there's this idea that you are opting into something that is consensual, and how it's just really not.
Yeah, this is, there's a couple responses to that. In the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has declared pornography a public health crisis. And I think it's up to 21 states now have defined it as such, literally on the books. The couple issues with pornography, I was just telling somebody this today. I was given a preview of a film that I think is going to be on Netflix, and it's in multi-episode type of presentation. It was 30 minutes, and it was, you watch these things, and it kind of wrecks my day when I watch these types of videos. But it was showcasing pornography producers and pornography performers who are intentionally modeling themselves after children. Now, they have to legally be the age of over 18 years old. But they show the dressing rooms of all of the young girl clothes that they wear. They discussed and they showed scenes of a 66-year-old man who runs one of these production companies. And I feel like literally, viscerally, a response when I am about to say these words. And he said in the video, it's my job to teach men how and where to go to groom women to molest them. And it's not women, it's girls. It's girls. Yeah. And they actually walk through the scenes of standing outside of a female bathroom and watching her go in, much like the story that you described at the sporting event. Mm-hmm. We don't understand really and fully the effects of pornography on just forgetting trafficking for a moment, aggression against women. 88% of the top videos right now are violent, aggressive acts against women. I mean, terms and expressions that I would not use on this broadcast are the things that men are searching for. Mm. This particular video was called Barely Legal. One of the number one terms that are used when Googling to look for pornography are youth porn. So what we're doing is legitimizing for men that it's not, you don't have to just fantasize about having sex with a girl. You can actually play it out visually. You can watch, and he says, I can instruct them on how to do it. That then leads us into looking for them on social media. That's one of the easiest access points. I did a presentation once where I said to everybody in the room, where is the most dangerous place for your children? And they all came up with different answers. And I said, in your family room.
The computer and a TV.
Yeah. Yeah, we watched a film once where it showed that the 10-year-old boy was on his laptop. His sister was there, his mother, his father. They think he's doing his homework and he's looking at porn. The average age that boys are looking at pornography, do you want to take a guess?
It's going to be so awful.
Ridiculous. 8.
8 to 11.
Yes. Yep.
8 to 11. So, we work with organizations like Covenant Eyes, and they have software on phones, and they have, filtering, and they have accountability partners and things like that. The thing that parents have to do is understand that this is a war. Okay? And if you're the bodyguard, then your job is to be all out vigilant, 24/7. What you can do to protect your children from men who are looking and learning about ways to get your girls and your boys.
Yeah.
The other thing that parents don't realize is that when the son, I'm going to say son because it's typically more boys than girls, is downstairs in the basement on the video games with his friends, they're getting open access to people that are trying to reach them through the Wi-Fi when they're playing the games. We had a story about an 11-year-old boy who got approached. And again, he thought it was a girl, but it was somebody posing in order, again, to get information from him, to get videos, to get images, to then upload it. So it's talking to our kids and helping them to understand the unseen dangers. You have to take it very seriously. And again, all of this it's all considered intersectionality. All of it comes together. 50% of children that are sexually assaulted in this country are assaulted by other children.
It's crazy.
So if you monitor in your home the devices for your children, but your 10-year-old daughter goes to her friend's house, it's just like we say, you want to call the parents and say, do you have a gun in your house? Well, you need to call and say, do you have full control over the devices in your home? The other area which is exploding, 60% of people admit to looking at pornography at work. Because again, it's on a handheld computer. You can do it anywhere. I talked to one person who was addicted to pornography, and he said that he would go into a meeting with his female supervisor playing out the scenes he had just watched on his phone of pornography, using her as the main character.
It's unbelievable.
When I do these presentations and I'm looking at both of your faces right now, and I'm thinking to myself, I just ran over them with a Mack truck and backed up. So my apologies for that, but in order to get people motivated to do something, we got to break your heart. Because when your heart is broken, it's going to build up and strengthen to pour into other people that we know are out there suffering. We have a big message to share, but with enough people that get motivated to care about it, we can make a difference. And I can assure you that we are doing that with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, both in the prevention and calling out these tech companies. It's called Section 230, Communications Decency Act. It allows tech companies basically to say that they run the platform, but they're not the publishers of content. That means that they will never be held liable. You could have thousands of children being trafficked on their site, and we cannot literally sue them for that until we close this loophole. So this is what the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is working very, very hard to do. One of them is called COSA, and it's the Kids Online Safety Act, which is really getting a lot of traction with a lot of senators and people in Congress right now. And again, I was at this retreat a few weeks ago with them. The problem is their VP of advocacy described it this way. She said, when we're up on the Hill and we're pushing to get the attention and calling out to these senators and Congress people, the Google lawyers are shoving us aside. and they're getting paid $1,000 an hour to do it. They literally have a team of the most combative, high-priced attorneys making sure that the children are not protected.
Wow.
I think, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to money and power, right? I mean, we want to think of this as a battle over like hearts and emotions and appealing to that sense. But there are a lot of people that will not be touched by that because it will hit them in their bank accounts. And that's what they're most concerned about. So the hotels, the internet platforms, sporting events, all of that stuff, they don't want to even acknowledge that this is an issue because then, again, they would have to take some responsibility for it. I think, too, Tia and I have seen our fair share and know our fair share. And still some of the things that you're saying are just so awful. But it's important because knowledge is power. And unless you know the full scope of what you're dealing with, how are you going to begin to approach it? It's really easy to kind of see something like human trafficking or sexual exploitation, or even let's go down further, pornography and prostitution, and think like, it's not that big of a deal. I can be talked out of or talked around its effects. And the reality is that no, it is a huge deal, and it's a huge driving force of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. And so with the advent of the internet and pornography being not only available but free to anybody, can you just kind of touch on how that has exacerbated and accelerated the problem of pornography?
Well, let me go back to a point that you made earlier about corporations do what they do because it is profitable. Mm-hmm. Consumers drive the demand. Consumers determine profitability. One of the things the National Center on Sexual Exploitation that we're talking about doing is buying. I own mutual funds, but I don't own the individual stock. We're going to start buying individual stock of these tech companies so we can go to their shareholder meetings and we can stand up and we can speak and we can call you out for what you're doing that is irresponsible in terms of protecting kids. And one woman did that works for the organization, and she was hauled out of the room, but into a private meeting with the CEO. So it's a wonderful advocacy tool to be able to do that. If more people understood how their children are being put out there as one of the sickest social experiments of our time, perhaps somebody would start to pay attention. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has what they call the Dirty Dozen list. They are the biggest 12 corporate offenders in terms of what they're doing. Google Chrome, which is used in schools across the country, had no filters in to protect kids from being able to access pornography sites. Could you imagine? We're handing a computer to a fifth grader and they're allowed to use and go anywhere they want within that computer. That has since changed. They were able to get most of the major hotel chains to remove pornography from their rooms so that kids couldn't accidentally look at it. So with enough work by parents and by communities and by churches really have a stake in this. Like, we are called to justice. We are called to protection of these kids. And there's not been enough because even churches don't want to talk about this. Right. I remember once giving a presentation and a woman stood up, a grandmother, and she's crying. Now, I'm feeling like, the dentist about to drill your teeth because the subject matter is so upsetting, and she's crying and she's saying, what am I going to do? I have 2 granddaughters. How can they grow up in a world like this? So the more education, but it's beyond education. It goes back to, do you understand the implications if you do look away? It's not just your children, your grandchildren, it's your community, it's our state, it's our country. It is what we do know as living in freedom, because there will not be freedom. Right now, there is so much addiction to pornography. And that's the other thing, is people don't understand the brain chemistry. You know, John Mayer, the musician, came right out and said, I'd much rather look at porn than actually go out and have sex with a woman. It's easier, it's quicker, cheaper. We have people that are in the spotlight joking around about pornography. I'll never forget, a few years back, I think Kanye West was on Jimmy Fallon or one of those late night shows, and he said, now, what kind of porn do you like to watch? You know, now you're married to a white woman. Do you look at white porn? He goes, well, I like to mix it up. And he goes, well, now that you have daughters, does that mean anything? He goes, nah, not at all. So when that's acceptable to talk like that and to not call that out, we're walking into a dangerous, dangerous time for children.
Wow. Tia, do you have any questions or comments?
Well, Sue, I want to thank you again for all that you have shared. I believe awareness is a huge key. And in that awareness, you have to tell the stories. You have to speak the truth. You have to put the information out there, no matter how surprising, how awful, how hurtful, how scary it may be to hear. So, though you have shared a couple of things that shocked us, and we've seen and heard a lot, I think it's necessary, you know, and I just say and I applaud you to keep doing what you're doing. I want to ask you, we touched on it, you know, already, but I want to ask you about some things that just the general person should be aware of, you know, what to look out for. You know, we talked about the airlines and computers and social media, and even at the risk of repeating the same information, what are some things that the average person can be aware of to look out for to possibly save another person and also save themselves from walking into a sex trafficking situation?
Yeah, I wish I was talking directly to middle school girls right now, because that's probably the key demographic that needs to understand this more than anybody else, because you have to look out for each other, right?
Yeah.
They are literally the ones that they can see a new friend comes to school and doesn't really know many people, and suddenly she kind of becomes the target. She's a little bit isolated. She doesn't really have a social group. She's invited to a party. And this is actually a true story that is on the Homeland Security's website. She gets invited to a party, and because she doesn't know anybody, there's not really anybody there to say, come on, it's time to go, you know, or she's in a network. So she has a drug that's dropped into her drink, and she ends up being taken back into the bedroom, and 4 or 5 men go in throughout the course of the evening, have sex with her, and it's filmed. She gets contacted the next day, and they say to her, you know, the guy says to her, I've got all this on film. And typically they can recruit 16-year-old guys, 18-year-old guys, 20-year-old guys to go out there and do the work of bringing in these girls. So then they threaten her, and they say, we're going to expose you on social media. Now, the girl doesn't feel like she has many options, and talk about shame and guilt. And this was from one night. Mm-hmm. She did nothing wrong. So what we need to understand is that kids have to really be looking out for other kids, because what happened in that case is they said, look, we just need you to do this a few more times, make us a little bit more money. It won't be that difficult. I'll give you a little drug. It'll make it easier. And pretty soon, one of the tactics that is used is get them addicted to drugs. Because once you can do that, you've really got them. There are kids that are being trafficked that go to school every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay? They're trafficked at night. They're trafficked on the weekends. They go home. They live with their parents. They live in nice communities. Nobody has any idea. So kids really have to understand that. Education has to happen. Teachers should be calling out for it in schools to make sure that they're awareness. The problem with that is parents do not want their middle school kids to learn about sex trafficking. It's scary. I've talked to district attorneys who have said, you're not going to get it into the schools, or you're going to get a very watered down light version that's going to make it sound like it's something that happens in a third world country, but not here in their communities. I spoke once to 60 principals of both elementary, middle school, and high school. And I practically begged them. I brought in one of our students from the Walker Home Club to talk about how she, in a really safe community, is getting approached by these men through her Instagram account or through her Twitter account. And we're putting it up on the screen and we're showing it. And I said, please let me come in, or somebody come in, from our organization, whether it's a student or it's me or whatever, and help kids understand what to look for. And I gave them handouts and explained all this. And I said, we will do a more, easy to understand version for elementary school, because you have to start in elementary school. The stat I just showed you, told you about, 8 to 11-year-olds are looking at pornography.
Yeah.
And they're showing it to girls, and they're acting out what they're seeing, and they're abusing each other. So I said, we can do it all different formats for each age group. How many of those 60 principals do you think approached me afterwards and said, I really want you to bring this to our school?
Less than 10, maybe.
Zero.
Zero. Ooh.
So again, I'm going to ask kids or parents to share with their children. If you see a girl, and it's happening to boys, it's about 85% female, but it's happening more to boys. I will say that trafficking victims are skewing younger now. That seems to be the preference, is the younger, the better. And that we as parents need to share with each other what we need to be talking to our kids about, obviously monitoring what they're looking at with their devices. It goes back to the don't talk to strangers, but this isn't seeing a stranger at a mall. This is getting somebody reaching out to you who poses as a 16-year-old. Mm-hmm. There was one girl that she so transformed her personality, she was almost unrecognizable to her mother at 14. And then she found the bus ticket. This guy convinced her to get on a bus and go to North Carolina. Fortunately, she found that. The girl was so out of control, belligerent, because she was convinced that this person meant the most to her. And that's the other thing that they say to these kids. I know your parents don't understand you. You're special. You need to know how special you are. That girl had to go away for 4 years to a almost private boot camp in order to reprogram what that trafficker had put into her head. So it's really just being vigilant and keeping education, keep talking, keeping open ears, doing it as a community. Don't do it in isolation. Talk to other parents. When your kids' friends come over, just lightly, touch on this. Have you been approached by anybody that made you feel uncomfortable on social media? Mm-hmm. I met with a 16-year-old boy who says that he just finds it unbelievable what middle school and high school girls go through. Literally a boy, first thing he says to her is, you're hot. And she's impressed. Second thing he says is, send me a nude pic. As soon as he says that and promises it's just between the two of them, the 16-year-old boy tells me, within minutes, it's all over the entire school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really important distinction, too, to kind of highlight the fact that parents are afraid of giving this information to their kids because it's scary and almost like it's going to open a door, but they have to realize that door's already been opened. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Just having a social interaction, having a phone or a computer, having your child already has all of the access to all of these different things. And so you're not opening that door for them. That door has already been opened. You're just showing them how to navigate that at that point.
There's a one-word response to everything you're just saying. Parents are the ultimate best deniers. It's not my kid.
Right.
It won't happen to my kid. My kid's not been exposed to that. It doesn't exist. Denial will get your kids in trouble.
Yeah.
So, ladies, as we are just under the hour, I want to ask you, Sue, what are some of your future plans or projects that you have for Walk Her Home?
Well, I'd love to see Walk Her Home in every single middle school and high school across the entire United States. That would be the goal. We have really been trying to pursue that. And again, trying to find that unique and very special high school or college student that's willing to take on this subject and then try to recruit others to get engaged is really tough. It's been really tough. We've got people started and then they slow down, they back up. It's maintained. And I have to say, kids in high school are involved in a lot of activities. I mean, they've got sports and plays and all sorts of things that they're doing. So this is really a commitment because you have to learn the subject matter. You know, each time that they do some type of an awareness event, there has to be an education related to human trafficking. Mm-hmm. I like them to be able to create it, and then, you know, I approve it. But that would be the goal, is to get more people involved. Also, just getting more people to be aware of the organizations that I'm involved with. You know, helping to do advocacy and pass laws and make a difference. And we are on a national level. We really, truly are. So many victories. One of the major sites, Pornhub, literally shut down because the National Center on Sexual Exploitation filed so many lawsuits. 70% of their staff quit. Their COO, their CFO quit. They got Visa, MasterCard, and Discovery to cut ties, so you can no longer use those cards to purchase pornography. They're working on age verification with some partners in the UK, are able to try to develop that so kids can't just go onto these sites for free. So there's a lot of good work that's being done, and I love working with those national organizations as well as doing things on a local level with Walker Home.
Awesome. Well, now you're international because you're with us.
I love that. I wish I could see all your listeners on this call right now.
We will definitely have you back to share more information. I thank you again for everything that you shared. Again, awareness, I believe, is the key. And we have to be open. We have to be honest. We have to tell the stories and share the information that's hard to hear, that we may not want to hear. But we need to have it in front of us. And I thank you so much for what it is that you are doing. And with that, ladies, I would like to give you both just a couple minutes to close us out for the night. So Jen, if you would give us your final comments first, and then Sue, you can close us out for the evening.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you so much for coming. I've known you for a few years, so I know what you've been doing, but gosh, every time I sit with you and talk about it, I'm just blown away. I guess my last question would be, it's such a big punch to the gut to hear all of this. It's so big and it feels overwhelming in a way that feels like you would never be able to make a difference, which obviously you're sitting in front of us, so we know that's not true. If somebody wanted to get involved with this issue, what is something that you would recommend they do? What's a first step?
The first thing I would say is go to endexploitation.org, which is the National Center on Sexual Exploitation's website. That defines for you all the different aspects of these issues, which I defined earlier as intersectionality, how pornography connects with child abuse, connects with prostitution, connects with human trafficking. It's all interrelated. And I'm going to also address what you just said, and I know our time is almost running out here, that you can feel like this is so overwhelming. When I first got into this, I'm not a social worker. My background's business and communications. So I'm not used to having hard, traumatic things that I deal with every single day. So I went to visit my very first safe house, and it was pouring down rain that day. And I'm sitting around the table with 8 social workers, and they're talking about these issues, and it's so heavy, and it's pouring down rain, and it's dark, and there's thunder and clouds. And I get in my car, and I'm driving the 45 minutes home, and I'm sobbing the whole way home. And I said, God, I don't have the guts for this. I don't have the fortitude. I don't have the stamina. I don't have the strength. And by the time I got home, God literally downloaded into me, I am not asking you to take this on by yourself. I'm asking you for one lost sheep.
Yes.
And that's what this is. Everybody, if we all just looked at it as doing one small thing for the greater good of humanity, can change the world.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. I think that is a perfect note to end the night on. Perfect. Thank you so much again, Sue, for being with us. Jen, as usual, thank you so much. Luv Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from the program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We thank you for joining us on Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay family, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Have a good evening.